What's up, everybody? This video is going to be for 4C, and it's going to be both parts 1 and 2, okay? So I know that if you've been in class, you've seen that we have 2 different parts for this lesson, but I'm going to teach them all together because I think it's basically the same exact process. We're just learning one process for factoring quadratics. So right off the bat, one other thing is if you're going to be taking notes with this, just grab a piece of paper and a pencil and like maybe a calculator. Okay, you don't actually need the note sheet because I've got the step-by-step process for you right here. So you could like pause the video and maybe write down these steps real quick. I'll read them off just to go over what we're going to be doing here. Okay, because this is like a pretty, once you've done it a few times, this process really isn't too bad. Okay, so step 1 is you're always going to be looking at what our terms are, our quadratic, and you're going to be trying to factor something out right off the bat. Okay, before I jump too much into this, let's just understand that when we're doing quadratics, it's always going to be in the term of some number x squared plus some other number x plus some constant term, okay? And that variable x might change. Personally, I'm always going to try to keep it as consistent as possible and just keep it as x. But so it might look like this. You might see a different one that's like 8x squared plus, I don't know, 13x, I'm just making something up, plus 7. You might have negative signs in there, right? You might have, let me grab a marker that maybe shows up a little bit better. We might have like, I don't know, let's put like 7x squared minus 5x minus 10 or something like that, okay? But just notice that it's always gonna be in the term of some number times x squared plus or minus some number times x plus or minus some other number. And we'll talk about what happens when we have the negatives in there as we move on with some examples, okay? So right off the bat, let's get right back to that step-by-step process. Step 1 is to look and see right at the very start, is there anything we can factor out of this? And it's pretty obvious with this one that there's not, because you can't really factor anything out of 1. And we're talking about factoring out the numbers, right? So we're always going to be looking, kind of what I've been telling the class is look for either if they're all big numbers, like there's one example we'll do where they're all pretty big numbers, or look for if they're all like even numbers, like 1, 5, and 6 are not all even, right? Or if they're all like divisible by maybe 5. You can divide all of them by 5, so they would end in like either a 0 or a 5, okay? Which not all of these do here. So step 1, we can't factor anything right at the start. Okay, so step 2 is going to be starting a 2x2 box. Okay, so starting a 2x2 box, we'll draw that up here like this. Okay, and again, the important thing to remember is this whole unit, everything in unit 4, we're basically doing it. So in unit 3, we learned about multiplying polynomials together, and now we're learning about how to basically take them apart. That's what factoring is really, is it's just dividing them out, taking them apart like with a purpose, doing it in a specific order for a specific reason, okay? So we're gonna start our 2x2 box and we're gonna put the first term in the upper left square, okay? So this is the first term. I'll refer to this often as like the ax squared term, with a just being a placeholder number. So we're gonna put in the whole first term right here, 1x to the second power. Okay, the second term, or the last term I should say, so let's just keep reading. Place the first term in the upper left square and the last term in the lower right square. So the last term is always going to be here. It's always going to be the number that doesn't have a variable. So we're going to put that one right here. Okay, so that's step 2. We're starting our box. We're just starting to fill it in. Okay, so then step 3 is we're going to multiply the numbers together and find the terms to fill in the remaining boxes. Okay, so we're multiplying these numbers, 1 and 6, and we're going to put that up here. And the reason we're doing this is because we're going to introduce all of step 3 is kind of doing a work off to the side in order to figure out what numbers we're going to fill in here and here, okay? So we're going to multiply these numbers. We do 1 times 6, and this is easy whenever this number is 1, right? 1 times 6 is just 6. So I'm going to put 6 right up here, okay? And now in order to find what numbers go here, what I've kind of been telling the kids in class is we want to be thinking about 2 numbers that are going to multiply together to give us 6, but they're going to add together to give us 5. Okay, so to show this like visually, for those of you who are maybe thinking about it, what I always like to do is, so I have my number 6 here and I have my list of possible b values, because really the middle term right here is, we call it the b term, all right? So we're going to be looking for a 5 on this list. Okay, so step 3 is all about creating this list. So to come up with the numbers, we're going to figure out, again, we're trying to figure out numbers that multiply together to give us 6. So we'll start with 1 and 6. Okay, 1 times 6 gives us 6. So I put 1 and 6. And then let's keep going. Okay, what would be the next number? So 6 divided by 2, rather. Okay, 6 divided by 2 gives you 3. So I know that 2 times 3 gives me 6, okay? There are really no other whole numbers that can multiply together to give us 6, because if I were to put 3 down right here, then it would be 3 times 2, and we already had that listed here, so we're all done coming up with those numbers, all right? So 6, this is positive, and that's going to be important, because if it's positive, then we're going to add the numbers together and find the sum, okay? We're going to add 1 plus 6, that gives us 7, 2 plus 3 gives us 5. So again, the question we were asking at the start of step 3 was, what are 2 numbers that add together to give us 5, okay, and multiply together to give us 6? So we found it with this row right here, this bottom row, okay? So I'm going to circle that row, and now all I'm going to really do is I could just take that number and put it here, that number here, but I need to remember that these have x's that go with them, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a variable x, okay, and I'm going to put 2x right here, and I'm going to put 3x right here. Okay, 2x and 3x, all right? And the reason that, so I kind of put the x's in here because really when we did this multiplication, this was like 6x to the second power up here, right? So 2x times 3x gives us 6x to the second power. 2x plus 3x gives us 5x. This all works out, okay? So this is the real step that I think a lot of people need practice on, okay? Once we get from here over to here, if I can see that this step is done correctly, I'm like super happy as your teacher, okay? So the next thing we're going to want to do here is we're going to factor out each row and each column. And we're going to do this, there's a couple different ways to do it. You can do it just by factoring rows and columns. You can do it by factoring rows and then using division to find what numbers go on top of the columns. Or eventually you can use your calculator or like any online or technology resource to just calculate greatest common factors, okay? And we'll maybe talk about that in the third example. So we're going to do this the first way and just factor rows and columns. So when I'm looking at this, the biggest number I could factor out between 1 and 2. I always start with the numbers. So if I were to list all the factors for 1, it's just 1 times 1, right? That's it. If I were to list all the factors for 2, it's just 1 times 2. Okay, this is going back to stuff we learned in section 4B, okay? Or I'm sorry, so if I were listing the factors for 2, it's 1 and 2, just like this. Okay, so I'm thinking of the biggest number that's on both lists, it's just 1. We have an announcement.
Teacher, just to inform you that Skyward is down, the district is aware of it, and they are working on it, but they don't know when it will be back up. Thank you.
Okay, so I know that 1 is the biggest number that I could take out on both lists. So I'm just going to pull out a 1, all right? So now with x squared, this is like 1x squared, right? And this is 2x. I want to be able to take out as many x's as possible. Okay, so I understand that with this list, we see x to the second power, we see 2. So we might immediately think, oh, we should take out 2 x's. But then when I'm over here looking at 2x, there's just a single x right here, okay? There's a single x because it's just x to the first power, all right? So I can only take out 1x there and there. So what that means is that right here, I'm just gonna put x. This is what we're factoring out, okay? So we're gonna do the same process with the next row, okay? We'll do the same process down here with 3x and 6. So I can list 3x and I can list 6. And I'm thinking of what are all the factors for 3? Well, it's just 1 and 3. Okay, factors being just numbers that will multiply together to give me 3. So 1 times 3 is 3, that's the only one, right? With 6, we've got 1 and 6, and we have 2 and 3. Because 1 times 6 is 3, and 1 times 6 is 6, and 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, so I'm looking for the biggest number that's on both lists. The biggest number I see here is 3, and even though 6 is bigger, 6 is not on this list, so we have to only go with 3 here. So I'm going to be able to factor out a 3. So now to get back to the variables, I see that this is 3x, right? So there's a single x here, but 6 doesn't have any x's with it. So we can't take out any x's here, okay? Because I can't factor out an x because 6 basically doesn't have an x to give, is sort of how I say it in class, okay? So we're good with these rows. Okay, so the next thing we can do is we can think of it the same way for each column. And I kind of like doing it that way, but another way that works is you can think about dividing it, okay? So if I wanted to do, if we just ignored for a second, if we just covered up this bottom row and kind of doing the reverse box method again, if I want to know what I put here, basically I'm thinking this times this gives me this, right? Okay, so now if I think about that backwards and I want to figure out what goes here, I'll even circle it, and I'll circle right here as well. I want to know this divided by that is going to give me that. Okay, and it'll be the same thing here. That divided by that will give me that, okay? So 1x to the second power divided by 1x, okay? And really all this is, it's 1 divided by 1, so that kind of goes away. And then x to the second power is really x times x, okay? So that's like x times x divided by this x right here, okay? So the same way that 1 divided by 1 makes it kind of go away, x divided by x makes those go away, and we're left with a single x. So our answer here is going to be 1x. Okay, we got 1x here. Okay, same idea here. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's go 2x divided by 1x and figure out what we're going to put right here. 2x divided by 1x. Okay, well 2 divided by 1 is 2. And then x divided by x means that they cancel out. So the only thing I have is 2. So I can put that in right here. Okay. And so now this kind of makes sense when I look, if I were to now cover up, let's say I cover up the bottom row, this is where like the math magic sort of happens. Let's say I covered up the top row like this, okay? So we're left with just looking at the bottom row. Well, 3x divided by 3, let's see if that gives us the same answer. 3x divided by 3. Well, 3 divided by 3, that cancels out and just goes to 1, right? And x just stays the same because we're not dividing by any more x's. So our answer here is just 1x. Well, that's what we have up there, so we know that that works. Okay, and then if I think about that last column right here, if I can do that divided by that to get that, let's just double check the math. 6 divided by 3, if you do that in your calculator, that's going to give you 2. And that's what we have up there, so it all works, okay? So now the last step, so that was all, I jumped to step 4. So step 3 was all the stuff over here. Step 4 was factoring out the rows and columns, okay? So now I see that everything in here is positive. There are no negatives that I need to worry about. So I just do this, and I do this, and this is our final answer. Okay, 1x plus 2, which I can just say is 1x is the same as x, so this is like x plus 2 times x plus 3. And that's our final answer. Okay, so let's see, how far into this video are we now? We are about 12 minutes in, so that's not too bad. We're gonna try and do one or two more examples. I wanna keep this under 20 minutes if possible. Okay, that's about as long as a lot of the other videos have been. So I think we all sort of have this process. We should have it all like written down, or we should be thinking about it. If you need to go back to it, you can like rewind the video and look at that, but I'm gonna erase all of this right now. And we're gonna do other examples with more room, and I'm gonna just kind of label the steps as we go, okay? So let's come up with another example. I'm gonna take a couple of these from the notes. And as you guys are watching this video, just understand that the quiz that you're gonna need to take with this video is basically just answering these questions. You're just doing this factoring in a quiz, and you're just showing me that you can take notes along with the video and get the correct answers, okay? So we'll erase this example as well. And let's come up with a new one. I'm gonna refer to my notes, and we're just gonna come up with a good example in the notes. Okay, the process is exactly the same again, so let's go ahead and do example number 5 from the 4C part 2 notes. This is a really good example, okay? So we have 12x to the second power plus 13x minus 4, okay? So we have a negative in here, and that's gonna change. It's gonna be like a little sub-step at some point along step 3, but it's really not gonna be too bad. So we start the same way. Step 1 was we decide, can we divide out a greatest common factor here, looking at this. And right off the bat, I'm thinking, well, we've got a 13 here, and 13 is an ugly number, it's prime, right? We can't divide it, like 13 divided by 2 doesn't work, divided by 3 doesn't work. So we can't really divide anything out of 13, which means that we can't divide anything out of any of the other terms, right? So step 1, dividing out a greatest common factor, we don't need to worry about it for this example. Step 2 is going to be starting our box. Okay, we start our 2 by 2 box. Okay, so if you're ever confused doing one of these problems, starting with a box is always the way to go. Okay, we take the first term and we put it here, 12x to the second power. We take our last term and we put it here, minus 4. We do this every single time, okay? We always take the first term and put it here. We always take the last term and put it here. It's always how we start, okay? So the next step, step 3, okay, so this was all step 2, filling this out. This was step 2. Okay, so step 3 is going to be all the business we do off to the right. And we start step 3 by multiplying across. 12 times negative 4. So we get negative 48. And that negative is going to be pretty relevant. as we go through this example, okay? So we've got negative 48, and then I'm gonna put b up here. This is where I'm gonna list my possible b values, okay? So again, the question that we're basically asking at this point is we're asking what are gonna be two numbers that will multiply together to give us 48, but now because this is negative, the difference between them is gonna be 13, okay? When it was positive, we were adding them together to get 13, but because this is negative, we're finding the difference to try to get 13. Okay, so we're gonna go through and we're gonna start listing our factors for 48. So when I list my factors for 48, I always like to start with 1. No matter whatever I'm factoring, I start with 1. So 1 times 48 equals 48, okay? It's even, so I'm gonna jump to 2 next. 2 times what gives you 48, okay? And so the way that you can do this with a calculator is you can really just think, what's 48 divided by 2? So if you do that in your calculator, 48 divided by 2, you get 24, all right? I really recommend everybody use a calculator. There's even a link on the Canvas page now to a pretty good online calculator that you can use while you're doing all this stuff, okay? So I keep going with it. What's 48 divided by 3? Use your calculator. 48 divided by 3 is gonna give you 16. Okay, what's 48 divided by 4? Use your calculator. 48 divided by 4 is 12. Okay, that's the math that we got. 12 times 4 is 48 at the very beginning, right? 48 divided by 5 doesn't really give you a great answer. It's a decimal, okay, and we're avoiding decimals. 48 divided by 6, that's gonna work because 6 times 8 is 48. 48 divided by 6 is 8, so our factors are 6 times 8 is 48. Okay, now if I keep going and I think 48 divided by 7, that's not gonna work. And then I think 48 divided by 8, that's the next number in line just going up. And I see it on the list already. It's here, so I know that I'm done factoring 48, okay? So now the difference between the first example and this example is in the first example, the number we got here was positive. In this example, the number we got is negative, okay? I'm actually gonna take this hoodie off real quick. I'm like starting to sweat. I know that's probably TMI for those of you at home, but you know, it is what it is. We're like 15 minutes into the video and we're not gonna start over here. Okay, so I'm looking at that and I know that I'm gonna have to put a minus sign between, so for example, it'll be 1 minus 48, 2 minus 24. And we're gonna do that, or that subtraction, and we're gonna put our answer right here. So 1 minus 48, that's gonna be negative 47. 2 minus 24 is negative 22. Notice that we're doing small numbers minus big numbers. So we're finding the difference, but our answers are all gonna be negative because the big number is the one that's being subtracted. It's like 3 minus 16 is negative 13. 4 minus 12 is negative 8. 6 minus 8 is negative 2, okay? So again, what I'm looking for here is the number that I was looking for was positive 13. Okay, so I found the correct number on this list. It's right here in the middle. So I know that this is gonna be the correct row. The only problem I see here is that we just have, we have negative 13. We want it to be positive, okay? So the trick whenever we have the right number with the wrong sign is we're just gonna switch all the signs for the row, okay? But when I say signs, I just mean that 3 started out as positive, so let's switch the sign. Hello, Mikey, I'm filming a video. Give me like 10 minutes. It's all good, okay? So I'm changing the sign, so I'm gonna go negative, 3 started as positive, so now it becomes negative. 16, this is minus 16, right? So let's make it plus 16. This is minus 13, okay? So now if I think about the math, positive 16, negative 3 is gonna be positive 13. All I did was I switched the signs of each number and it made sense, okay? So now I have the right number with the right sign, so I'm just gonna go ahead and put the variables in, x, 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 okay? Because remember, again, the multiplication here ended up giving us x to the second power. It was 3x times 16x, okay? And so I can put 3x, I can put that one right here, and I can put 16x here. And remember, it's negative 3x. I keep saying just 3x, but that's negative 3x and positive 16x. Okay? So I've got, that's basically it for step 3. Okay, we've figured out, and the only extra thing we did here from the first example is we had to deal with that negative, okay? So now we've got everything in here, and again, if you get to this point on like a test or something, I'm gonna be super happy with you getting to this point. So now we have to factor out the rows and columns, okay? So if you're using a calculator in class, like if you get back in time to take the exam, the trick for using the calculator, and I want you guys to even use like any technology with this. If maybe you're at home and you don't have one of these calculators, but if you have this calculator, let's see. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I always, to find the greatest common factor, I go math right 9. And that pulls up GCD, okay? So let's say that I wanna find the greatest common, the GCD of these two numbers. This is really nice. All I have to do is I put in 12, comma, 16, just like that. Okay, I don't even need to close the parentheses. I press enter, and it tells me that it's 4. Okay, it's gonna tell me that the answer is 4. People keep trying to come into the classroom and distracting me, okay? So I'm gonna put the number 4 right here. And the trick with the variables is we kind of just need to get used to seeing the same patterns here, okay? So I know that I have x to the second and I have a single x, so I can only take out one x here. Okay, so if we were to use GCD again with the calculator for the bottom row, we would end up getting an answer of 1. Okay, if I just put in 3 and 4, I'm gonna get 1. And when I see negatives in a line like this, I make it negative. Negatives in a line means that you carry that negative out, and that's the only negative you need to worry about, okay? So again, we could do that GCD. So let's say you're at home and you're using your computer or something. As long as you have access to the internet, just try this. Literally type into Google, greatest common factor for 12 and 3, and tell me what it says. I'm guessing it's gonna tell you the answer is 3, okay? Because the greatest common factor between those two is 3. Again, I'm getting used to seeing this pattern of trying to factor out an x between these two. I can only take out one x because 3 only has a single x to give, so this is 3x, okay? And then greatest common factor between 16 and 4 is gonna be 4, all right? And so because we already took care of our negative with negatives in a line here, I know that this is gonna be positive, okay? So, and this is our final answer here, everybody. This is our final answer. We get 3x plus 4, 3x plus 4 times 4x minus 1. Okay, and that's our final answer. All right, at this point in the video, we are 22 minutes in, okay? So I think this is probably, let's do one more example. I think it's important enough to do one more, okay? So let's find one last example that kind of incorporates everything. We'll go through a few of the steps a little fast, and if you have questions about them, you can like email me or whatever. But let's go ahead and do, I think example 6 is really good here from the 4C part 2 notes. Okay, let's hope that we can get done with this video inside a half hour. Okay, so I have 10, and we switched up a variable here, okay? But I'm gonna move it back to x. So I've got 10t squared, but I'm gonna write 10x squared plus 35x minus 20, okay? So the first step is to factor out a greatest common factor right at the beginning. And I think I can do one here because all these numbers are divisible by 5. So let's divide each of these by 5 and come up with a brand new quadratic, okay? So we're gonna have 5 on the outside, and now when I do 10 divided by 5, 10 divided by 5 is 2. So 10x squared becomes 2x squared. Okay, 35 divided by 5 is 7, so we're gonna say plus 7x. Okay, and then 20 divided by 5 is 4. So we're gonna go minus 4. Okay, so now we factored something out at the start. We factored out a 5. So for the next step, setting up our 2x2 box, I always like to put 5 kind of in a big spot like right here, 5 times, and then we're gonna do all the work with our box just like we've done before. Okay, so we're gonna go right here and we're gonna have first term, 2x squared goes here. Last term, minus 4 goes here. Okay, let's multiply these together. 2 times minus 4 is negative 8. Okay, negative 8. So now I'm at the point where I'm thinking, let's find two numbers that are going to multiply together to give us negative 8, but they're going to add together or subtract together because it's negative, right? So the difference is going to be positive 7, okay? So let's go ahead and just start by factoring 8. The factors for 8, I always start with 1 and 8, and this is an example where that's going to actually, we'll understand why we use 1 and the number, okay? Let's keep going. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 8 divided by 3 is going to give us a fraction. 8 divided by 4, we already see it here, so we know we're done, okay? I have the minus sign with 8, so I'm going to put minus and minus, and I get 1 minus 8 is negative 7. 2 minus 4 is negative 2. Okay, so again, the number I was looking for is positive 7. So I see the right number, excuse me, I see the right number with the wrong sign. Okay, so again, this is the row, we see the right number, we have the wrong sign. So all we're gonna do is change all the signs for all three numbers. One is positive, let's go negative, positive, positive. Okay, and now it looks pretty good. So now I can put my x's in. X, X, X. Okay, so minus 1x can go right here. And again, it doesn't, so if I put minus 1x here or here, all that's it'll just change the order in which our answer is, okay? So let's put minus 1x right here, minus 1x. Let's put positive 8x right here, positive 8x, okay? And so now I'm gonna kind of speed through factoring the rows and columns because now you have a couple different tools. You can use your calculator, you can use like Google if you're doing this at home and just Google what's the greatest common factor between 2 and 1, greatest common factor between 8 and 4, okay? So that's gonna be the thing that we really just need to get better at with practice, all right? So greatest common factor for the top row is gonna be 1x. Okay, I can only take out a single x. Remember, we're getting used to that pattern. Bottom row, the greatest common factor between 8 and 4 is 4. Okay? And we can't take out any x's, right? Because this 4 doesn't have an x to give. Okay, this first column, the biggest number factor between 8 and 2 is just going to be 2. And of course, we can take out the single x, okay? Because they both have at least one x. For this last column, the greatest factor between 4 and 1 is just 1. Anytime you're trying to factor two numbers, the greatest common factor between two numbers, and either of them is 1, you know you're only going to be able to pull out a 1. That's just the way it works, okay? And so then I've got two negatives in a line here, so I just carry that negative all the way up. And then this one stays positive, okay? And so this is our final answer now. Let's not forget about the 5 that we started with. So our final answer, we're going to write 5 times 2x minus 1 times 1x plus 4. And again, I could have just written that as x plus 4. It's the same thing, right? So if you switched it, if you had your 8x here and your negative 1x here, you would just have your answers flipped a little bit. It would be 5 times 1x plus 4 here and then 2x minus 1 here. But it's basically the same thing, you guys, okay? So this is our final answer. And that's basically it for 4C. This is one of the most important processes we're going to learn all year, mainly because we just come back to it a lot. And if you go on to take secondary 3, you're going to do this an absolute ton. Like, it's going to always be part of your curriculum, okay? So if you have any questions, again, send me a message. I'd be happy to jump on like Zoom with anybody if you need help. But I hope this kind of made sense, okay? So make sure you're taking the quiz at the end of the video, and thank you for watching.